Ladies and gentlemen, Monty Hook. I'm here in the studio in Bali, and today I am joined by Mr. Brian Kelly. Brian, how are you, man?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me, Monty.
Yeah, thanks very much for coming in, man. So you're one of the co-founders of Yogi Lab. I've had a few of you guys in here. Dave talking about meditation, Aaron talking about a bunch of weird shit. You guys are all pretty cool and doing really amazing stuff. Your expertise is breath work. Yeah, tell us. What are you known for?
Oh gosh, what a loaded question. I guess I would consider myself to be a serial entrepreneur, a father, a seeker of truth, probably over and above all things, which is what led me to breath work. But I would consider myself wisdom seeker and a truth seeker before all these other labels, because ultimately that's really what I'm doing with my life, is just trying to navigate with the best possible information. Because we've been fed a lot of baloney through the system in our younger years. And so a lot of it is just deconditioning what I've been told. And essentially one of the biggest areas where I feel like we've missed the plot is in our breath. And so I'm a bit of an advocate and say a bit of a missionary for teaching people how to breathe correctly, because we think that because we breathe automatically, we're breathing healthy, and that couldn't be farther from the truth.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about this earlier, there's there's people like us who've kind of been awake for a long time that the education system doesn't work, and maybe a lot of things in the health industry are not good for us, and there's a lot of things we could go into. But it kind of occurred to me that, like, why are we not taught breathing? Like, people say, okay, nutrition is really important, exercise is really important, sex is really important, but you can't do any of those unless you can breathe. If you're not breathing, you can't do any of them. So it's kind of like breath trumps everything, right? So why are we not taught how to breathe properly?
For a number of reasons. There's no singular answer, but I believe that we can cure and heal a lot of ailments that happen in the body through breath, and that kind of goes against the pharmaceutical agenda. Also, there's just a lack of understanding of how the breath works in popular science and what's taught and trained in schools. And the nervous system is a funny thing. The autonomic nervous system is a funny thing, because these processes that are automatic inside of our bodies, you don't have to think about it. So you feel like it's out of your control. And breathing is the only autonomic nervous system function that we have any control over. You can, I'm controlling my autonomic nervous system like that.
Control the blood pumping through you.
The heart rate, the blood pressure, the digestion, all these things that are happening without giving it much thought, but you can control the breath. And the magical part of that is when you control the breath, you can control all the other autonomic nervous system functions.
Yeah.
You breathe fast, you're going to speed up your heart rate and your blood pressure. You breathe slow, you're going to trigger digestion. So the fact that we have so much control over what's going on inside of our body simply by how we breathe is, when I found out about it, it was one of those, holy fuck, why doesn't everybody know about this kind of a feeling?
So when was this? How long ago?
I really got into breath work. The story that I tell quite frequently, my finding breathwork story, happened a few years ago when we were doing an experiment. It was our first experiment for Yogi Lab. We started out doing a little bit different stuff. We were guinea pigs in the experiment of things that we wanted to challenge ourselves to see how we would respond to high stress environments and things like that. And so we brought a guy over, his name was Steon, his ex-bodybuilder guy, and we were going to do a body transformation experiment. Yeah. So we wanted to see how fit could we get in 60 days with total focus in the gym and eating a diet that helped us to accomplish whatever our fitness goals were at that time.
Yep.
And this guy came over, a just massive ex-bodybuilder guy. And, the kind of guy you would think has every area of his health in total alignment, which is normally the case. But at this particular time, he was just going through a really rough patch. He had multiple family members all come down with terminal cancer at the same time, and relationship struggles, and nervous system was shot, wasn't getting any sleep. He was not sleeping 6 nights a week, and he was powering down a bunch of Ambien 1 night a week just to put 4 or 5 hours of sleep. So it was just shot. You could just see it written all over him. And we were invited to do a guided breathwork journey. And there was 7 or 8 of us, all the Yogi Lab guys plus Dion. And we laid down, I had never done anything like this before. I'm thinking, breathwork journey? I was a bit skeptical. I'd heard stories and I had tasted little bits. And I'm always I'm an open skeptic. You know, I don't want to rule anything out until I really try it. And so I was hopeful that there was going to be something going on there, and there definitely was. This guy, after 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe 20, he just started getting, it was a very physiological experience for him, shaking and crying, just moaning. And it was almost like he was right next to me, and it was as if someone was being it was like an exorcism that was happening right there. Yep, just moving around like crazy. And I'm having a deep experience, but I'm fucking distracted by what's going on with them, right? Yeah. And after the hour goes by, I think everybody was just kind of waiting with bated breath to see what he had to share, because obviously, you know, something was happening there. And he said, you know what, of all the things, Explorer, out of all the things that I've ever done in my life, all the DMT and the psychedelics and the ayahuasca and the plant medicines and the meditation and the transcendental meditation, he said, I've never experienced anything like that before in my life. And you could see there was a shift in his energy. And the next day we saw him and he looked like a new man. His skin was a different tone of color. And he said, last night I slept for the first time in months without any sleeping pills. And I'm thinking, what the fuck? We just breathed for an hour, you know? Like if that can have that level of impact on this guy in an hour, then what kind of an impact can I have in my life and potentially the people that are around me? So I just became fascinated and super curious at that point. And that's what, once I become curious about something, it's kind of hard to take me off the track. And then I just dove down the rabbit hole and just been studying it ever since.
So, I mean, what you're talking about there with that experience, I mean, the first one I did, it was called a holotropic breathwork journey. Yeah, I don't know exactly, you know, it's explained different ways, but I had a pretty similar experience. And my, I don't know if I was like moving around as much, but I certainly had a very deep experience, and I'd done a lot of ayahuasca, peyote, plant medicine ceremonies and different things, spiritual experiences. And that was the first time that I had that kind of experience, but through my own means, like without taking some external medicine or something. And then that's what blew my mind. It's like, how do we not know this? Like, how do we not know that we can go to this place using just our own body? Mm-hmm. It's remarkably mind blowing. And it's like, what occurs to me is like, how do we not know this? So question to you is, did our ancestors from way, way back, did they know all this stuff? And then did we kind of lose it along the way somewhere? Or
100,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of kind of my Bibles in the breathwork field is Dr. James Nestor, the book Breath. It's one of the best-selling books on Amazon. Highly recommend going and checking it out. What he says is, you know, there's what is it? The subtitle of that book is like the modern science of a lost art. And if you go back far enough, there's an incredible amount of information on breathing. And I feel like we lost track of it somewhere. And then the studies that come out over the course of the last 120 years, a lot of the ones that James talks about in his book, they're groundbreaking and they're peer reviewed and all the science is there, but it just gets buried for whatever reason. And so as a result of some kind of an agenda at play or whatever the case is, because it goes against the status quo to not be able to throw pills at somebody when they're sick and struggling. Yeah. And the amount of healing that can happen in the body with the breath, if people knew it, they would go through a massive transformation in how they live their lives through how they breathe. It's like, okay, let me give an example. So most people are familiar with the idea that our body is designed to heal itself. Our body is a healer. You know, you get a scratch or you get a scab, you could film it for 3 days straight and speed it up, and you're going to watch it scab over and get better. You get sick, you get the flu, you get COVID, you get a cold, whatever the case is, if there is such a thing as COVID. Can't believe I just said that live on the air.
You heard it here, folks.
Anyways, the conspiracy theories aside, our bodies heal themselves. So yeah, it helps to get rest. Yeah, it helps to drink Gemu or whatever it is your thing is. But your body is designed to be a healer. What people don't know, because it's less known, is our bodies are designed to heal themselves of mental and psychological traumas, but they don't do it naturally. It's not an autonomic nervous system function to heal mental and psychological
So you've got
trauma.
to trigger it somehow.
You got to trigger it somehow, and the breath is the trigger. So what
Mm.
you did in your holotropic breath work, super powerful,
Yeah.
healing people of anxiety and schizophrenia and all sorts of mental illnesses.
Well, I mean, my experience, the way I explained it afterwards, and if anybody hasn't tried it, like, I think people should go and try it for themselves, because it was just like a massive release. It was like a lifetime of emotions coming out of me in an hour.
Yeah.
Right. And I think even if, you know, how far you want to believe that we store emotions in our body and all this, it's different for different people. But I think everybody can relate to the idea that, you know, we all hold some kind of grief, or we hold some kind of sadness, or, you know, something, some bad memories or whatever.
Yeah.
And that stops us in some ways, right?
Yes.
And then when you can just purge buckets and bulk amounts of that out, it's like, it's very empowering.
Whether those complexes and those traumas are stored in our body or just somewhere deep in our subconscious and our psyche, we store them somewhere.
Yeah.
So to take the argument of where it's stored out completely out of the equation, it's stored somewhere in our being. And you have to shake it up to shake it out. And so it's crazy because you can do, I've talked to people that have said, I did more in 1 hour of breathing than I did in 3 years of psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Because to talk, this isn't anything against psychotherapy. There's some amazing therapists out there, but to think that you're going to be able to talk your way through and out of the stuff that's inside, it's just a longer road. It's a longer path. And when you do it this way, you remove the ego from the whole process. You surrender your ego at the door. The ego, I always tell students, you put the ego in the back seat. You and your subconscious are up front, and then hand over the healing to the body. You don't have to sit and think about doing anything. Just breathe deep.
Yeah.
You want to go deep, breathe deep, and then you just let your body get this stuff in and out, and then you can move on with your life. The shit that we're carrying around with us since being children.
Or past lives.
Let's see how powerful that was.
Amazingly powerful.
So I think for me, my mission is all about giving people tools that they have been living inside of them their whole lives, but have laid dormant.
Yep.
Because I feel like there's a revolution that can take place in our general health and well-being when people understand the power of this raw force that they have inside with our breath.
So, I mean, we'll circle back and talk about some of the specifics, maybe some techniques of, you know, what people can do. But my first question around this is, like, what are we doing wrong in our breathing? Like you mentioned to me before that 90% of probably the whole world is not breathing correctly or not optimally. So what are we doing wrong? Because, and I'll give you myself as the example. So I've really only discovered breathing in the last few years. And I grew up with really bad asthma, allergies, lung kind of issues and stuff going on. Yep. And I struggled as a kid to breathe. Now, I know from my understanding, and this is just my, you know, my thing, but of course, all of those conditions I created for myself out of some kind of trauma response, right?
Yep.
That being said, it stayed with me for a very long time. Like that breathing stuff stayed with me for a very long time. So I never knew how to breathe. Nobody ever taught me to breathe. My parents didn't know. I remember in school getting taught about the food pyramid, which is another rabbit hole we could talk about, but
no agenda there.
But then nobody ever said, this is how you breathe. They said, this is how you eat and what you should eat, but nobody told me how to breathe. Yeah. So what are we doing wrong with our breathing?
So there's a few, great question. There's a few layers to it. So what the science is now showing, if you go back and you look at, this is a lot of layers to this one. And obviously I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but if you go back and you look at skulls and artifacts from hundreds of thousands of years ago, all the skeletons had perfectly straight teeth. So our fucked up teeth, I have them on my bottom. That has happened over the course of the last, let's just say, since maybe right before pre-industrial revolution, and pre-massive agriculture. And so we started eating very processed foods and foods that have been made soft and everything else. So we're chewing less. So when we chew less, our bone structure builds in a different way. And as a result, the biggest problem is that we've become mouth breathers to some extent. And so the biggest issue is that as a result, if you look at a baby breathing, you're going to see a baby breathing slow and controlled, but deep through their nose into their belly. Yep. It's the healthy way of breathing. And if you watch a lot of adults, 90% of adults, they're switching from their nose to their mouth, and we're chronically over breathing. So instead of breathing deep but light, not a lot of oxygen, deep and long breaths into our belly, into our diaphragm, we're breathing short and shallow into our chest. And what happens when we do that, if you think about it, watch a lot of people breathe. You won't see most people breathing into their abdomen. We're breathing slow and shallow into our chest. And as we do that, essentially what's happening is we are triggering our bodies to be in a state of chronic stress. If people think, I have anxiety, so I'm a shallow breather. It's the other way around. Yeah. You have anxiety because you're a shallow breather. And so shallow breathing has... it leads to...
And it's a loop. That's a self-fulfilling loop.
It's a self-fulfilling loop. You end up with snoring and sleep apnea and bad circulation and heart problems and respiratory illnesses and issues. And that's all as a result of our light, shallow breathing. And the biggest thing is that it constricts this thing called vasoconstriction. So your blood vessels are tightening, and there's bronchial constriction. Your airways are tightening. So as a result, you don't have good circulation flow through the body. And all of this, if you think about chronic stress on its own, what potential illnesses chronic stress leads to, there's volumes and encyclopedias written on this very thing. Chronic stress can lead to cancer if left unchecked. And so all of that is a result of shallow breathing. So essentially, everyday healthy breathing can be trained. It can be trained quick. You can train someone to be a really healthy breather in 1 month with trained, focused time.
I actually have I've been doing some work with a guy in the USA. He's been helping me with my neck, actually. And a couple of things here. One is, one of the main focuses, he's talking about the tongue, right? And the relationship between the tongue, breathing, the neck, everything. And how the tongue is just it's another thing that's not talked about. And one of his theories is, you see the, like the New Zealand Maoris and the Islanders, and they do the haka, the warrior dance, and they're poking out their tongues, and they're using their eyes this way and that way. Like that has a purpose. It's not like they're just doing a dance. They're doing it because it puts them in a state. It gives them like a life force. And he's been giving me tongue exercises to do, and it's like just as simple as sticking out your tongue as far as you can, and how much difference that can make. And one of the things he observed with me, because he was just watching me breathe, he said, just breathe. And he noticed my breathing was good. And I'm like, okay, well, that's good. And he asked me, he said, are you thinking about your breathing? Like, because the way I was breathing was correct, like the small percentage that you're talking about. I said, no, I wasn't thinking about it. So it's something that I've learned over the last couple of years to be able to breathe properly. I've still got a long way to go, but yeah. So
not trained, understandable.
Yeah. So look, a lot of these breathing techniques and skills, there's something that you have to be proactive about. Like they're an active exercise, right? You kind of got to consciously think about it until it becomes an unconscious habit, like I was talking about. But what is the right way of breathing, just as an everyday, like without having to think about it, like just moving around every day, taking photos, doing a podcast, like how should we be breathing? Is it still that long breathing that you're talking about?
Okay, so the best way to put it to where it's without going too sciencey on it is the average human being should take it somewhere between 12 and 16 breaths in a minute. When I first did this exercise, when I wasn't a healthy everyday breather, I was like 20, 22 breaths a minute. And I wondered why I was stressed and overwhelmed and a bit anxious with all my responsibilities and balls of juggling and everything else at Yogi Lab. And so it's really about slowing down the breath, number one. Number two is just breathing through the nose all the time. The only time you should ever be breathing through your mouth is if you're doing one of these deep journeys like holotropic breath work, or one of the journeys like I like to guide my students on. You breathe through the mouth because you can take in more air. You take in more air, your body has a faster response. You can go deeper into the non-ordinary states of consciousness.
I do it in the ice bath.
Yeah, mouth breathing?
Yeah,
yeah.
And
you
I go
can.
into like a really deep state, like it's like a really deep meditation, just like that.
Yeah, before I get into the ice bath, I'll do 25 or 30 rounds of like Wim Hof, like Tumo breathing. And what that's doing is you're off-gassing all of your carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the most misunderstood thing that's going on inside of our bodies. And it's the key to healthy breathing. Because ultimately what popular science would tell you is that when you breathe in oxygen, your oxygen is going into your red blood cells, and that's releasing carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is a waste gas. You just want to get that out, and it serves no purpose. But 100 years ago, there was a study, and it's called the Bohr Effect, and that essentially says the more carbon dioxide that you have in your body, the more oxygen that can be infused into your cells. So the more oxygenated your body can become, the more pH balanced it can become. So training yourself to have carbon dioxide build up in the body has massive amounts of health benefits. But the problem is when we're breathing shallow and into our chest, we're releasing all of our carbon dioxide, meaning it's harder for our bodies to absorb oxygen. So carbon dioxide training is essentially what breathwork is. People overhype up the importance of oxygen and downplay the importance of carbon dioxide. So if you're here, how you know how this works is if you do a bunch of and then you hold your breath, you can hold your breath twice as long. The first time I did it, without even thinking about it, 3.5, 4 minute breath hold with no training. No training. And it was like a 2.5 or 3 minute Wim Hof exercise. And I realized, okay, something's going on. Well, what's going on is you're off-gassing all your carbon dioxide. And so you can hold your breath for a really long time. When you need to breathe again, it's not because the oxygen, you've ran out of oxygen. Your oxygen levels are still 95 to 99%. It's because your carbon dioxide is the reflexor that tells your body it's hungry for air, in which case you have to breathe. So when you do, to come back to your question, when you do slow breaths, like with me, do this real quick. Sit back and breathe we're just going to do like a 6 or 7 second inhale, but feel it going into your nose and kind of into your belly. And everybody at home, if you're watching this, you can do this with me. So breathe out all your air, and then coming in slowly through your nose for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Really short hold, and then out for the same amount of time. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That would be considered a really long breath. But what's happening there, you might feel your body is hungry for oxygen a little bit, like some people that are breathing. But that's telling you that your carbon dioxide is building up, which is increasing your lung health. It's telling your body that it's triggering safety in your body. You have all this, your blood oxygen level is going up and all these different things. So the more you can train longer breaths, deeper, but not a lot of air. Like the samurais were tested. If you could see them breathing, they wouldn't graduate to the next level. They needed to be breathing deep into their belly, but not where it's really showing, and you would think they were holding their breath.
Really?
They were really healthy breathers. You have tribes in the Amazon who are so healthy breathers, this is probably that 10%, they could run and track prey, like when they're hunting and stuff, breathing just through their nose, running at full speed, because they're super, very well trained, healthy nose breathers. So, and their heart rates would barely change as a result. So that's long-term effects of super healthy breathing. But for the everyday breather, it's very simple. Breathe the longer breaths in through your nose, into your abdomen. That's it.
That's cool. So you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I guess people come to you with probably a lot of stress symptoms. That's usually the trigger for people to start exploring, okay, well, I'm having these symptoms, I'm fucked up, what do I do about it? And then they find breathwork somehow, right? I mean, it should be the other way around. We should find breathwork and be able to regulate ourselves and not get into that state. But that's the world we live in, is that we break ourselves first and then
fix it later.
Find a solution. So what are the symptoms that you're seeing commonly with entrepreneurs, especially because that's mostly my audience. What are they kind of coming to you with? What are the symptoms that people could maybe look for and go, oh, well, shit, that's me?
Chronic stress, anxiety, overwhelm.
Yeah. Do people know that they have chronic stress or overwhelm though? Because I've had this really interesting thought recently, because I've sought out people for, I've had an injury, right? I had fractured ribs last year, and it hadn't healed. And I've been going through a lot of rehabilitation exercise, and I've been doing a lot more breathing. And the more I get into it, the more I realize that the fractured ribs were a symptom of probably a weak diaphragm or something else, right? It's like I'm not breathing properly, so that's why the ribs fractured. It's not like I've got pain because the ribs fractured.
Yeah.
Like it's because of something else.
Yeah.
And I've really been getting into, why? What's the source of that? And I've been seeking a lot of advice, and I've been, meditating and, finding my own answers. And what's kind of occurring to me is that, and a lot of people said, the question that comes up all the time is, oh, have you been stressed lately? Oh, have you been stressed lately? And in my mind, I'm like, no, I work 4 or 5 hours a day. Look where I live. Look at my life. How could I be stressed?
Yeah.
And what I've kind of come to think is that perhaps that my baseline for what I know to be stressed or not stressed is not healthy. So if I feel like I'm not stressed, which I don't at the moment, well, maybe that my baseline is still a score of 3 or 4 instead of a 0. And maybe I've never experienced my whole life a state of non-stress. I'm sure there's been moments, right? So this is why I asked the question. Can, like somebody like me, how can people actually recognize
whether they're chronically stressed
whether they have stress or not?
I feel like you're one of the very lucky, fortunate souls that you don't. Most of the clients that I work with, and just judging from my own internal world, which is really my baseline of understanding of everything, is more about, because I feel like we vilified stress, just like we vilified being in fight or flight side of the nervous system. Yep. Being in fight or flight is not a bad thing. We need to be in fight or flight. When we go into an important meeting, when we are in exercise mode, when we're having sex, when we're doing anything that requires us to be active, we need that fight or flight. We need that stress because it helps our bodies and our minds adapt to the world. You know what I mean? So there's a big difference between healthy stress, which is what it sounds like you're up against, and really unhealthy stress. Like a lot of entrepreneurs, I think the percentage is that when I was doing this study recently, because entrepreneur is kind of my avatar, if you will, because my ideal client was me 3 years ago, is chronically stressed to the point of feeling numb and unable to work because it's so intense. 48% report going into that state from time to time. And that's a state where you're almost paralyzed to be able to be productive. And so focus is gone, concentration is gone.
Not sleeping properly.
Irregular sleeping patterns, clarity. Like I'm one of the lucky ones when it comes to sleep. No matter what's going on in my fucking life, I'll lay my head down and sleep like a baby.
These days I'm good
for 8 hours. I mouth tape. We could talk about that later, so I can train myself to breathe through the nose at night. But they know it. There's not a. I wonder if I'm really stressed. Like they know that they're really stressed. And the thing about these states is that they're states of being that we're traveling and traversing through no matter what we have going on in life. Every moment we're in some kind of a state. I'm calm, I'm relaxed, I'm hyperactive, I'm stressed, I feel anxious, I feel really productive, I feel a lot. These are all states. And depending on what's going on with the external inputs in our world, it's driving us to have some kind of a state inside. The issue is that most people are slaves to their whatever mental state that they're in. They might have a mindfulness practice or a meditation practice that they do to hedge against these things that come up. But usually when I ask people, what's your protocol? What do you do when you're really stressed out? They usually look at me like a deer in headlights. Like, what do you mean there's an option? And the reality is that breathing is it's the best tool for state change. It's like, if I want energy and activation, I have a breathwork technique that I can do in 2 minutes that will give me the energy and the focus and the concentration and the clarity. If I'm way too pumped up and I need to come down, there's a breathwork technique that I could do that's going to lower my heart rate, lower my blood pressure, trigger my parasympathetic nervous system, tell my body it's time to rest and digest. So I'm no longer a slave to my state of being, to my state of mind, because now I have tools that can shift it no matter what is going on. And so it's almost like the ultimate toolbox for navigating the curveballs of life.
Yeah, that's cool. So when you talk to entrepreneurs and they're, fully chronically stressed and they're in this situation, what's the first thing that they need to do? What's your advice? Where do they start?
Well, the reason why I created my course, it's called MB30, Morning Breath 30.
Yep.
It's 30 days of morning breathwork activation, because I feel like it all starts the tone of the day. I didn't invent the idea of how important a morning routine is, but I am an advocate of it. Like I have my day starts with the quality of my morning, and my morning is just very dialed in, and which allows me to have a very productive day. And I start every day. The first thing I do when I roll out of bed is I go and I do my activation.
What time do you wake up?
5:30 to 5:45 every morning. And it doesn't take a long time. I'll do anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes of breath work. Like right now, I'm just QAing my own course. So I'm just going through my own course. So I throw a set of headphones in, I go lay on the extra bed in my house, and I do a full power activation breathwork technique. What's happening when you do this type of breath work in the morning or anytime during the day is essentially you're triggering your body into a temporary voluntary state of stress, because it takes, if you've done holotropic, there's nothing relaxing about breathing really heavy for 2 hours.
You feel like you've
takes a lot of fucking energy.
You feel like you've been in the cage with
fighting for your life, right? And it's like, because the thing is like we're always going back and forth between our sympathetic fight or flight. I like to call it alert and activate because it's easier for people to grasp as it being a good thing, or parasympathetic rest and digest. And we're always kind of going back and forth. And sometimes we're a little bit in both. And that's kind of a hard concept to explain. But the reality is most people are struggling because they have huge swings to both sides. And when we do this activation breathing, it's almost like it shocks the nervous system, so that for a short period of invested time on the clock breathing, you can have days or weeks of being a lot more relaxed and a lot more calm. So what are the long-term benefits? Is like my emotional triggers, like what would used to piss me off just doesn't bother me anymore. If something comes up, I can do 1 to 2 minutes of just activation breathing. And whatever it was that was bothering me is immediately gone. If I still feel any residue, I just breathe for a little bit longer. And that is kind of my go-to approach to breathing, the hard-hitting activation stuff. However, some people have issues with panic attacks, or they have issues with respiratory illness or asthma or mental illness, and there's slower breathing techniques that can calm the body down. So for example, one of the most common breathwork techniques in the game is called the 4-7-8. And they call it the tranquilizer for the mind, because it just gets the mind to quiet down and cool down. And that's 4-second inhale through the nose, 7-second hold at the top, 8-second exhale through the nose or through the mouth. You do that for 5 minutes. And you can also do that right before sleep, and you're in a super parasympathetic state, and your mind and your body can completely relax.
So one of the things that's occurring to me as you talk through this is, I think the world, especially in the Western world, we live such busy lives, and we're just chasing, and we encounter these problems, but we don't choose the problems. It's like they are just circumstances of our lives, and then we've got to figure out how to navigate this, how to regulate our reactions to the problems, right? And the thing that I've been saying for a long time to people is choose your problems, right? Because you're going to have problems no matter what. There's no fucking choice, right? I mean, if you're a human and you're alive, you got problems.
100%.
And what I think is, if you get to choose your own problems and bigger problems, then the other small stuff kind of becomes insignificant, right?
Yeah.
And that also gives an access to be able to regulate reactions to problems.
Of course.
So I had this kind of observation of myself when I was living here in Bali, like 2016 I was here, And I ended up choosing to leave because I was like, I didn't feel like I was growing. And one of my observations of myself at the time was, and I was always telling people this, like, choose your problems. And I noticed one day I was getting cranky because of the stains on my laundry shirt. I'm like, if this is the problems that I'm investing my energy into, I need bigger fucking problems. Right? And I think it's like, that's a quirky example, but I think
it's a good one.
Everybody can relate to that. Like, if you're getting consumed and chewed up in small stuff,
yeah,
you got no fucking hope.
Yeah, no way. I mean, what a terrible quote from my childhood, but I remember it really well because it's super relevant. Is don't cry over spilled milk, and it's all spilled milk.
Yeah.
You know, I have a slightly different perspective on, I believe that we're co-creators of everything that comes our way at some level. And so even the problems or whatever else it is, they're by our very design to show us something. And that doesn't all have to be a lesson, but to give us something to where we can learn and we can grow. And the thing is like these are the little mini tests, because ultimately we look back at the stuff that we're going through right now when we're 90 and it all becomes pretty fucking insignificant, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like I the one of the exercises that I do is sometimes when I feel like I'm really in it is I'll zoom out and I'll zoom out and I'll look down on myself from as if I'm standing on the moon and looking at the earth and then analyzing the little problem that I have as little me down there on the earth from the moon.
Yep.
And that takes the perception of it being a really big problem out of the equation. But the sooner that we can realize that there's this whole idea of just the gamification of life where we can stop taking shit so damn seriously. And just start living and doing the best we can.
Because you might be in a game anyway, so
we just never know. But it does become a lot more fun when one of the quotes that Dave shared with me, which is a slightly different angle but still potent, is make your mission bigger than your fear.
Yeah,
and it's like
that's kind of what I'm alluding to with the choose your problems.
Yes,
like choose problems that are beyond you and are going to make an impact. And it's like, okay,
the ones that actually matter.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like we use child sex trafficking as an example of that. That's a real fucking problem.
Yeah,
you know, the fact that I woke up and didn't have coffee because I forgot to go to the store, and
the coffee tasted
bad or whatever,
it was a 9 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10.
They fucked up my soy milk cappuccino or whatever the case is.
Yeah,
hardly a problem. So problems definitely need to be put in perspective. The thing is about this though is, you know, we're emotional creatures and we're emotional beings, and we have stuff that's happening inside of us based on our life experience and based on our conditioning, our upbringing, and everything else. And you know, to suppress our emotional reactions is also not the way.
Yeah.
But to deal with them healthily is the name of the game, and that's what you figure out as you go through life. I'm dealing with it hardcore with my 8-year-old right now because everything is a really big drama, you know. So to help her see that it's really not that big of a deal is a lot of work.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah. I mean, we're kind of indoctrinated into this world where if we have a problem, then we need to try to solve the problem, not in a healthy way, but by fixing it with some tool, some pill, some vaccine, something, and not healthily deal with it. Yeah.
Get to the root of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're experts at treating the symptoms and avoiding finding the cause.
Yeah.
By design, unfortunately. But that's all.
So you kind of dropped a hint before that, you know, maybe breathing is one of these things that is technologies that has been suppressed for whatever reason. Like what's your take on all of that? Because a lot of stuff has obviously come out in the last in 2020 and 2021 about you know, vaccines, and you know, more people than ever are seeing, well, maybe there is potentially agendas, maybe, you know, maybe there is something for what people are talking about with food and these, you know, toxic chemicals, and maybe the information that the government is not in the interest of the population. Maybe it's in the interest of the government. So, I mean, what's your take on that? Because it kind of seems to me like that's a little bit why you got into this. And you mentioned before you're a truth seeker, and that's kind of what I have on my Instagram as well. So, I'm really, that's why I have this podcast, because I like talking about these technologies that are and tools that are healthy that people can implement no matter what their beliefs are.
Yeah.
Right. But I also like talking about maybe there's some things happening in the world that
Sure.
if you understood, you might realize why you have been the way you've been and give yourself a new level of power to do something even bigger and better and live a more fulfilled life
100%.
and more impactful life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, take that
Speak to
wherever
that.
take that wherever you want to go.
Well, knowledge is power.
Mm.
You know, it sounds very cliche, but like I'm a truth seeker because I like having choices. I don't like being told it's A or B, black or white, this or that. I like knowing that there's a range of spectrum of the choices that I can make to improve the quality of my life and the lives of my friends and family around me. And it's almost like it's funny to talk about. It's no mystery that the pharmaceutical industry has an agenda to pump pharmaceutical pills. But just using that one arm of everything that you just brought up, you just look at, like, for example, I know people personally that have cured cancer with CBD oil.
I know people who've cured cancer from water.
I know exactly. Yes, certain types of water. Or I know there's a woman in Jakarta that's curing people of thousands of patients using pure organic tobacco. Getting them to smoke it until they get sick, blowing it all over them, getting that energy to leave their body and channel through like metal beds down into the floor. And you don't hear about this kind of stuff. Yeah. And then you hear about like hydroxychloroquine, for example. I personally know doctors through my contacts in the United States, because I'm born and raised in California, who treated thousands of patients with hydroxychloroquine and zinc, treating COVID with 100% success rate. Yeah. And hydroxychloroquine was on the safe drugs list with the World Health Organization for 60 some odd years. Yeah. It was safe. When it came out that people were using HCQ successfully in the United States, they had a big smear campaign saying that it wasn't healthy.
The same in Australia. Massive in Australia.
And they shut it down. Anybody that was talking about it, they were yanking their medical licenses and everything else. Everybody should wonder what the fuck is going on there, because we're talking about an international, a global pandemic that's affecting everyone. It's crashing the economy and everything else. All of a sudden, there's a fucking cure, and they don't want people to know about it. Like, okay, conspiracy theories aside, let me look at the camera for this one. That's a fucking fact. That's a fact. And so this big smear article that came out about HCQ, what they'll do is a few months will go by and they'll pull it down. They'll say, oh, this wasn't correct. This study that says it's dangerous and everything else. And so if there can lie about that level if there can be that level of deception for something that affects every human being on the planet right now, what else are they lying about?
What else about?
You know, so I'm not out there telling people to run out in the streets and be anarchists, but I am telling people to think for your fucking damn selves and to ask questions. And if things don't add up, then they don't add up and you should ask questions. And that's essentially how I live my life.
And look, I mean, the thing that I'm trying to also get people to understand is, or ask the question of, is how much of what you believe has been fed to you by the media. So, and this is why I think there's a lot of systems breaking and maybe some anarchy and some rebellion certainly, but a lot of truths coming out now is because up until the last 10 years or so, knowledge has always been paid for, like in newspapers, television, radio. Knowledge has always been paid for, always, until now where we have the internet and now all of a sudden people can, so things that cost money before are now free, right? Information is now free. So what that is giving access to is maybe things that could have been shared before are now being shared, and all of a sudden, there's a lot of people look at that and go, wow, okay, cool, I can get that. A lot of people look at that and go, okay, well, no, that's a conspiracy theory. But what I ask people to look at is, look at your own beliefs and where did those beliefs come from? Do you believe what you believe maybe because it's just been fed to you over the years? Or are you really thinking about this for yourself?
Yeah.
And then, because I'm the same as you, I'm not trying to make people wrong. I'm trying to get people to think for themselves. If people say that they've done all the research on vaccines and they want to choose to take it, great, all the power to you. Yeah. Because what I'm happy about is that you you made it within your own power. What I really hate is when it's forced upon people. Like in Australia, there's the no jab, no pay, no jab, no childcare. It's like that is not cool.
No,
that is not cool.
Yeah.
So,
and it's a big problem.
Yeah.
We were talking about this before, and I couldn't sit here and honestly tell people that I understand what's going on with the vaccine agenda. There is a vaccine agenda.
Yeah.
I just don't know exactly what it is or who's behind it. But what I do know is when you create a vaccine, there's supposed to be years of clinical trial to study to be able to figure out what are the long-term effects of a vaccine. I don't remember what the statistic was on how long polio was in the polio vaccine was in clinical trials, but I had the privilege of seeing a festival where Del Bigtree, the producer and director, he has The Wire, I think it's called, is his show, and he produced the movie Vax the movie.
Yep.
And he did a 2-hour presentation, and I went into it open-minded, skeptical. I had already had a background of asking questions, so I knew there was something going on. But what he presented, it was inarguable scientific data. And he picked it apart. He had vaccines, the ingredients inside of them analyzed, and the amount of vaccine protocols since the 1920s or 30s, 40s, 50s when they came out, I can't remember, but they're not all that old. It's just gone through the roof, the amount of vaccine protocols. Yeah. And all the vaccine horror stories, what's going on in India with Bill Gates Foundation, what's been going on in Africa, hundreds, thousands of people dying within weeks of taking a vaccine. All those stories are buried in big tech and in Google. So after watching this, my initial response was, I don't care if I have to stay in Bali the rest of my life, and if I can never travel and see another beautiful place of the world again, I'll never get stuck with that vaccine. Yeah. I'm not going to tell people what to do or what not to do, but usually what I'll do in situations like this, I'll say, look, go and watch this documentary. Just do it for your own good and do it for the good of your family. And if you decide that you still want to get a vaccine after that, by all means do it. We'll still be friends, and I won't judge you for it.
So, I mean, I think I'm probably one of the healthiest people that I know. I've not once been vaccinated in my life. Not once.
Holy shit.
So that's my reference point, right? So that's why I'm very, passionate about talking about it. My sister was not so lucky because it was around the late 80s, I think around 1989, and I don't know if it's the same in the USA, but certainly in Australia, that's when these vaccine agendas really started getting pushed very, very heavily.
Yeah.
And then since that time, this chart that you're talking about, if you look at it from that late 80s, like the amount of autoimmune disorders, and I'm going to get in trouble, but autism, all these different things have just spiked ever since then.
Yeah. And you're a fucking conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, I am. But I 100% believe in my own body's ability to heal itself.
Yeah.
Especially, I'm not actually anti-vaccine. I'm anti-vaccine for things that the body can deal with itself in certain environments. Like if you're living in a slum in India and, that's different conditions than what we have in Australia and the USA.
Yeah.
There is no way in hell that the human body cannot deal with the coronavirus. There's no way.
Here's the idiocy of the whole thing. The virus has a 98% some odd or 99 depending on who you ask survival rate. And the only people that are really dying are the people in their 80s and in their 90s that have pre-existing health conditions. Yeah. The fact that we think that we have to vaccinate the whole planet for a virus that has a 98% survival rate, you're trying to tell me that there's no agenda there? It doesn't add up.
I heard the statistic the other day. The average male age of death in the USA is 76.4. The average age of somebody dying from coronavirus, 76.4. The exact same number.
I think 60% of the people that died from COVID were living in elderly homes in the United States.
I think it's more than that. And the other one is, the other statistic that I heard was 89% of anybody who's died from coronavirus, or might even be in the 90s, like it was proven they had vitamin D deficiency, and 90% of population has vitamin D deficiency, and nobody who has proper vitamin D sufficiency gets sick.
Yeah,
I don't get sick.
Yeah. and they're putting cause of death. Most of the people that are dying from COVID, they're suffering from some other debilitating disease that they probably were going to die from anyways.
Yeah.
I have comments on social media. I was collecting them for a while, probably 300 or 400 comments from people on various threads around Facebook when I was actively speaking out against this stuff, talking about how their family members passed during this time, and they were labeled as COVID deaths, and they died of cancer, and they died of tuberculosis, and they
Car crashes,
falling off buildings. Everything is a COVID thing. So I feel like it's an obvious thing. I don't tend to even have these discussions with most people anymore. I like to do it on shows like yours because there's a potential that this could get out to people that really need to hear it. And then they question, maybe I should look into this vaccine thing before I do it. Because cognitive dissonance is such a major player in this whole thing. Once people make up their mind that this is a conspiracy theory and this is the way that it is, it doesn't matter how much fact or truth you smear around their face. They just don't want to see it.
And it doesn't matter what you believe. You'll find evidence to support the biases of your existing belief.
Exactly.
Like that's the algorithms of the technology that we use is built that way. Mm-hmm. I mean, Instagram and Facebook and Google are all built to show you things that you believe in.
Yeah.
So you will only ever see things that support your current beliefs.
Yes. I believe there will be time. I believe I'm about to turn 40 this month.
Yeah.
And I believe in my lifetime that all of these lies about everything that we've ever been told will be revealed on some level. You want to know why I believe it?
Yeah.
So back when I was getting into all that, my triggering event was I started looking into September 11th attacks.
Yeah.
And I started primarily to look into Building 7. Because a lot of people still don't know. 50%, more than 50%, I feel like we tilted the scale 2 years ago when more than half the population of the United States don't believe the official narrative of 9/11 anymore, which is a really, really great indicator. Building 7 wasn't hit by any buildings. It was a few blocks away, and it fell in its own footprint during the September 11 attacks. It makes no sense. There's architects and engineers against 9/11 thing. There's thousands of them saying that this is a controlled demolition. It's not possible. Trying to remember. Oh yeah, why I brought this up. So that was my big thing. If they could lie about this, what else are they lying about? And so that was what kind of spun me down the rabbit hole. And I found the work of Greg Braden.
Yep.
And Greg Braden, amazing guy. He wrote one particular book. I think it was called The Essene Mirrors, something like that. And he was not an archaeologist, but he was an archaeologist. But anyways, he studied ancient civilizations. Yeah. And he did the most comprehensive translation of the most ancient texts written on the planet. And there's like 12 or 13 of them. And primarily studying their prophecy about end times and things like that. And so he was studying the most classical that people go to is like the Mayans and 2012, but also the Syrians and the Egyptians and 12 or 13 of these ancient civilizations. Yep. And he was looking for the threads of prophecy that were correlating, the correlations. And what he found was not only did they all correlate, but when translated to perfect English, when they talked about the future, they all pointed to the same time in human history, which is circa the epoch of time of 2012, which is what we're living in now, the Kali Yuga, whatever it's called. But they all use the exact same phraseology to talk about it with this specific event, the specific time. And they called it the shift of the ages. Yeah. And it translated perfectly to the shift of the ages across all these civilizations. Now, how that's possible, this is pre-Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Google. This was civilizations that were 2,000 to 10,000 years ago.
Aliens.
And they were ancient aliens and everything in between, possibly. And that's another conversation we can get into on another podcast. And they all pointed to the same time and said the same fucking thing. Like, how is that possible? Yeah. And so as I continue to read, they said that what this time represents is a time where we go through the darkest right before the dawn, and that the light will trump the dark, and we're entering an age of enlightenment, essentially. And so part of the dark to the light transition is the exposure of all the lies and the shadows and the darkness and the deception. Once I read that, it was almost like I instantly became a bona fide optimist that everything is all under control by some higher plan and that everything was going to work out well and okay. And so as the world burns and crumbles and forced vaccinations and COVID and everything else in between, I'm just sitting here watching as the world wakes up. because you can either see it as this is this has been one of the best transformational years of my life, and for many people that I know as well.
Probably everybody that we know in Bali.
Yeah. And I see a shift of consciousness and a shift and an evolution of the human species way more than I see the death and destruction of the economy or people say, oh, I wonder when things are going to be getting back to normal. You know what I have to say? That fuck normal.
Yeah, no thanks.
Because that's where we were.
I've never been normal though, so it
me
means
either.
nothing to me.
We were living in the dark, deceived to what's really going on in the world around us, and people are waking up and they're starting to ask questions and they're starting to see the truth and the light.
Yeah.
And that makes me more inspired than anything else.
Yeah. And I think one of the good things out of this last year or so, I mean, the idea of shutting everything down and lockdowns and travel restrictions, you know, if there has been an agenda from
Wherever.
puppet masters, I think it's backfired on them because it's allowed people to go inside and really question, well, why was I living this? Why was I in that job? Why am I in this relationship? And really start to become introspective. And I think that's the answer to all of it. Like and because that's where you get the opportunity, because if you can start asking questions for yourself, then you can start asking questions outside. It's like, and they're tuning into their intuition. Oh, that doesn't feel quite right. Why did I believe that before? Why did I eat that before? Mm-hmm. And start asking different questions. And then the lifestyle changes. And then next thing you know, you're a spiritual guru.
I believe that, and this is one of those strong beliefs that's unshakable. Most of my beliefs are up for discussion, and I'll change it on a dime if information is presented otherwise.
I'm good like that too.
I believe that the biggest threat to the system is people who know how powerful they really are.
Yeah.
And when enough people know how powerful we really are, there's so many of us, and we have so much control. When we understand the power that lives inside of us, it's a massive threat to the status quo.
That's the very thing, though, that if there's people in power, they know how much power they have, right? They have that same belief in themselves and that same level of power, but they're not using it for good reasons.
Yeah.
And they've just been the most, the more powerful force, I guess, up until now. Mm-hmm. And now I think, as you're saying, the tide is changing.
I wish I could be in the board meetings. I don't know if they're still under the illusion that, you know, that they've got it under control, or they realize that it's an inevitability that it's going to come to an end. Like stories that I heard back when I was in my radio days is that there's a lot of infighting amongst the would-be controllers and their families, and that they want to like let go of the reins and let things normalize again. Who fucking knows?
Yeah.
All I know
is... What families are you talking about?
Oh gosh. Another podcast, but Rockefellers and all these other guys. And who knows? Like there's people pulling puppet strings. I don't know who they are or what their long-term agendas are, but all you got to do is go and do a little bit of research, and you uncover things like Agenda 2020 and Agenda 2031, and they hide everything in plain sight.
Those ones are obvious.
You know, you look at Event 201, happened right before COVID broke out, and it was a simulation of an international pandemic with all the exact same circumstances.
You can watch the whole thing online.
Yeah. So all I know, my barometer is how I feel on the inside, and what I see and hear people talking about. And there's more chatter on social media now of people asking questions than there ever has been before. I was a black sheep, very much so, for the 3 years that I was in alternative media radio journalism. And now I feel like I'm swimming in a sea of black sheeps, and a lot more people are out. There's a lot of promising indicators, but until the scales tip, I vote with my feet. I vote by where I live, who I surround myself with, what I do, how much control I sign over, and how sovereign of a lifestyle that I live. And you can live a much more sovereign lifestyle in Bali than you can in some of these other westernized countries. Yeah,
100%. Like people don't really realize. Like I've felt very unsafe about Australia for a long time. It's just my intuition. Like maybe for 6 or 7 years, and there's sometimes I go back to Australia and like, just doesn't feel right. And I could put that down to, okay, well, maybe I just prefer living in Asia. But I've felt like something is not right. And last year, a lot of cards got put on the table. I was like, okay, this is what's going on. And it's super dangerous in Australia because Australia for the longest time has been the lucky country. Like everything's good. She'll be right, mate. That's the phrase. And that's very dangerous because people are so used to everything's going to be okay. She'll be right, mate. And then what that means is people could be doing things under your nose and you would have no idea because your attitude is, yeah, she'll be right, mate. She'll be right. Everything's good. Like I think that's the most dangerous place on planet Earth right now.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there is...
At least in America, you guys have got guns. Well, maybe not in the next couple of weeks.
What do the Japanese say? Behind every bladed grass, there's an American with a rifle.
Yeah.
I think there's a certain degree of power that comes with embracing discomfort as much as possible. I feel like being too comfortable scares me because you're not when you're too comfortable, you're just not growing. The thing is that simulated discomfort and simulated stress is what I appreciate. You know, I like going in the cryotherapy at negative 110 for 3 minutes and freezing my bones off, or going to the ice bath, or putting myself in strange situations that might cause me harm, because I appreciate that adrenaline and I appreciate the whole adaptability thing that's happening as a result of that. And right now, things are very uncomfortable for a lot of people. But for me, it really just boils down to what's your mindset. You know, I mean, and I say this with as much of being humble as I can, because the reality is there's a lot of people struggling with really real shit on the planet right now. There's people that are struggling to just put food on the table for their families. And I could sit here in this air conditioned room and sit here and say all day, you just need to relax and just, meditate and go within. And it's not going to solve the world's problems, but we can't control a lot of that.
Yeah.
All we can control is the world that lives inside of us. And the more of us that realize that, the faster the world changes as a whole.
Because we've got a greater capacity to take action, make an impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And have the insight and the foresight to know what actions to take.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the other thing that's happening in the world right now is people are really starting to question what's important.
Yeah.
And where before, in the 80s, what was important was making money and, driving Ferraris and, buying handbags and
401k in retirement.
401k. And now people are, and that's why I'm now taking an active interest in cryptocurrency. It's always been on my radar, but now I'm like, now's the time where it's going to really start seeping in. It's going to have some tangibility. Whereas maybe in the past 5 years, it's been, yeah, that's interesting, it's cool, but it's just market sentiment. Now it's like, okay, now there's some real world applications, and now there's enough people to start think about implementing it and making it work for us.
I'm just a big fan of decentralization as much as possible in all areas of life.
Yeah. I
mean, we're even doing it with Vipassana, with meditation right now, where we do online free Vipassana meditations every month because people can't get to centers. And that's for the first time ever, people could sit and do 100 hours of meditation with their laptop and an internet connection. And I just, these are the kind of things where we just need more and more of this coming out, because the more power we take from centralized power centers of control, whether it be government or media, most people don't know that 7 corporations own all of the media outlets of the world, and they wonder why we're being broadcasted these exact same messages.
And 87% of media revenues in the USA come from pharmaceutical companies.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they own the same. They're the same companies.
But you can't say that because that would be a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Don't go there.
Well, no. I mean, we could probably take this down a lot of rabbit holes, but I want to kind of tie this back to breathwork, and kind of what's occurring to me is, as I shared before, I think that holotropic breathwork experience is a great access for people to kind of to wake up and go, oh, wow, like, I didn't know this was a thing.
Yeah.
And then when you get that, like you get some massive like slap in the face of, oh shit, like this.
All that with the breath?
All that. It's like, well, what else? What else? What else? What else?
Yeah. Makes you curious.
So if you haven't done it, go do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll make sure people got access to you. What's the best place to connect with you on Instagram? Yep.
At Life of Brian Kelly, BRIAN
Yep.
KELLY on Instagram. Yogilab.com is where I'll send you a link and you can share it for my course.
Sure.
Any entrepreneurs out there, this really isn't just, my course isn't really just for entrepreneurs. It's really for anybody that wants to take their power back and maximize their potential in the morning to activate their day, but also give them tools to be able to navigate the challenges of life. That's what breathwork does.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, people will talk about, there's never a conversation about high performance without breathwork.
Exactly.
Or there shouldn't be.
Yeah. So that's what I'm pushing right now. My mission is just to get breathwork to as many people as possible. I'll probably be doing that until the day I die, or as long as there's air that's still coming in and out of my lungs. I do a biohacking and breathwork boot camp once a month for any of your listeners that are here in Bali. The next one is April 30th to May 1st.
That's at the Astana?
Yep. And that's 2 deep dive kind of holotropic level guided breathwork sessions per day, plus 2 cryotherapy sessions, a couple spas, and a couple workshops on the science of breathing.
That's awesome. That should come up.
You should.
Yeah, man. For
Invite extended.
Excellent. All right. So we'll make sure everybody's got the link to go check you out. But yeah, man, I just want to acknowledge you for the work that you're doing, because as you said before, it's like, it's just going to be, it just requires enough of us to get these kind of messages out to people, and for people to kind of have the experience that you've had doing something before as maybe a corporate career or whatever, and go, okay, no, well, the world is demanding this.
Yeah.
Like, let me go teach this. Let me be part of this and be part of that movement in some way. So you guys at Yogi Lab and are doing really great work in being a massive driving force for this movement, which
Thank you very much.
Good stuff for the world. So.
I appreciate that. Last plug, we're doing a global meditation day around the Maharishi effect. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah, so we talked about that with Dave. So that's where what he's saying is when 1% of the population in whatever environments can meditate together, can make a massive shift. Yeah.
Crime and
so the end goal is 80 million people meditating at one time, and then if we can do that, then that'll make a massive impact to
change the world. No big deal.
Change the world. Make it happen, people. Get involved. Get involved.
Thanks for having me, Monty.
No worries, man. I've got one final question for you, and I ask this of everybody. If you had the one-time superpower of mental telepathy, and you had the ability to connect one short message with all 7.8 billion people, or whatever the number is now, on the planet, what would that short message be?
What a great fucking question. I would say, breathe and know that all is well. We are one human family. Make love, not war. And to just keep taking the steps. Just keep taking the steps. I feel like so many people are so challenged right now for having the energy to just push on. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and we're doing this together. The speed of consciousness evolving right now is going at a rapid rate. And just hang on, because brighter pastures are on the horizon. I guarantee it. So just keep breathing. Nice deep belly breaths in through the nose.
Go and learn from Brian. That's a really nice way to finish, man. Feeling you on that one. So guys, make sure you go check out Brian, Yogi Lab, get involved in all that kind of stuff, and see you next time back down the rabbit hole. Brian, thanks very much, bro.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, Monty.
Cheers, guys. See you next time.
Appreciate it.